Live
Early
with
last year,
our
the
brother
FOMC
Jerome
has
Powell,
significantly tightened the
Mr.
stance of
Fairman,
monetary policy.
Chairman of the Fed.
Today, we took another step by raising our policy interest rate a quarter percentage point, and we are continuing to reduce our securities holdings at a brisk pace.
Let's take a look at the action.
We've covered a lot of ground, and the full effects of our tightening have yet to be felt. Looking ahead, we will continue to take a data-dependent approach in determining the extent of additional policy firming that may be appropriate. I'll have more to say about monetary policy after briefly reviewing economic developments.
Next.
Recent indicators suggest that economic activity has been expanding at a moderate pace. Growth in consumer spending appears to have slowed from earlier in the year. Although activity in the housing sector has picked up somewhat,
Keyword is
it remains
moderate.
well below levels of a year ago, largely reflecting higher mortgage rates. And higher interest rates and slower output growth also appear to be weighing on business fixed investment. The labor market remains very tight. Over the past 3 months, job gains averaged 244,000 jobs per month, a pace below that seen earlier in the year, but still a strong pace. The unemployment rate remains low at 3.6%. There are some continuing signs that supply and demand in the labor market are coming into better balance. The labor force participation rate has moved up since last year, particularly for individuals aged 25 to 54 years. Nominal wage growth has shown some signs of easing, and job vacancies have declined so far this year. While the jobs to workers gap has narrowed, labor demand still substantially exceeds the supply of available workers. Inflation remains well above our longer run goal of 2%. Over the 12 months ending in May, total PCE prices rose 3.8%. Excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 4.6%. In June, the 12-month change in the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, came in at 3.0%, and the change in the core CPI was 4.8%. Inflation has moderated somewhat since the middle of last year. Nonetheless, the process of getting inflation back down to 2% has a long way to go. Despite elevated inflation, longer-term inflation expectations appear to remain well anchored, as reflected in a broad range of surveys of households, businesses, and forecasters, as well as measures from financial markets. The Fed's monetary policy actions are guided by our mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. My colleagues and I are acutely aware that high inflation imposes significant hardship as it erodes purchasing power, especially for those least able to meet the higher cost of essentials like food, housing, and transportation.
Are there no churches?
We're highly
Are there no
attentive to the risks
workhouses?
that high
Oh, wait,
inflation
prisons.
poses to both sides of our mandate, and we are strongly committed to returning to inflation to our 2% objective. At today's meeting, the committee raised the target range for the federal funds rate by a quarter percentage point, bringing the target range to 5.25% to 5.5%. We are also continuing the process of significantly reducing our securities holdings. With today's action, we've raised our policy rate by 5.25 percentage points since early last year. We have been seeing the effects of our policy tightening on demand in the most interest rate sensitive sectors of the economy, particularly housing and investment. It will take time, however, for the full effects of our ongoing monetary restraint to be realized, especially on inflation. In addition, the economy is facing headwinds from tighter credit conditions for households and businesses, which are likely to weigh on economic activity, hiring, and inflation. In determining the extent of additional policy firming that may be appropriate to return inflation to 2% over time, the committee will take into account the cumulative tightening of monetary policy, the lags with which monetary policy affects economic activity and inflation, and economic and financial developments.
You want to know what would be funny?
We will continue to make our decisions meeting by meeting based on the totality of the incoming data and their implications for the outlook for economic activity and inflation, as well as the balance of risks. We remain committed to bringing inflation back to our 2% goal and to keeping longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. Reducing inflation is likely to require a period of below-trend growth and some softening of labor market conditions. Restoring price stability is essential to set the stage for achieving maximum employment and stable prices over the longer run. To conclude, we understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country. Everything we do is in service to our public mission.
I don't
We
know
at
how
the
I can
Fed
do
will
it
do
without
everything
giving
we can
the whole
to
thing
achieve
away.
our maximum employment and price stability goals. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. You have, I think, a couple times in your opening remarks talked about this language in determining the extent of additional policy firming that may be appropriate. Should we take that to mean that additional hikes are likely on the way? And should we also believe that all future meetings, say September and November, are live, or are you in a every other meeting mode? Thank you.
So we haven't made a decision to go to every other meeting. It's not something we've looked at. We're going to be going meeting by meeting, and as we go into each meeting, we're going to be asking ourselves the same questions. So we haven't made any decisions about any future meetings,
All right.
including the pace.
Respect
at
my
which we
privacy.
consider
Nobody look at the
But we're going
account
to be assessing
stuff
the need
here.
for,
I'm just
further tightening that may
trying to
be
get the live
appropriate.
chart.
Read the language
Look
to
away.
return
Don't look.
inflation to
Don't
2%
record
over time.
this. You know,
I
this
would
is
say
my
that
private
the
stuff.
intermeeting data came in broadly in line with expectations. Economic activity remained resilient. Job creation remained strong while cooling a
Don't
bit.
judge
And the
me.
June CPI report actually came
Don't
in a
you
bit
judge
better than
me.
expectations for a change. And the June CPI report, of course, was welcome, but it's
We
only
run
one
our
report,
account
one
hot.
less data. We hope that inflation will follow a
Don't
lower
judge
path
me.
as
You're
was
fucking
it will be
judging me.
consistent with the CPI reading, but we don't know that, and we're just going to need to see more data. So what are we going to be looking at? Really, it will be the whole
There we
broader
go.
picture, and starting with we're looking for moderate growth.
So
right?
here's
We're
a
looking
live
for, supply and demand
view
through the
of
economy coming into better
Brother
balance.
Powell's words
Including
upon
in particular in the labor market. We'll be looking at
the
inflation.
market.
We'll be asking ourselves.
So far, the market likes it.
Does this whole collection of data, do we assess it as suggesting that we need to raise rates further? And if we make that conclusion, then we will go ahead and raise rates. So that's how we're thinking about the next meeting, and how we're
All right, I
thinking
gotta
about
sell
meetings
my
going forward.
hedges, I
potentially. But,
guess.
we're now mainly thinking about the next meeting. I will also say, since we're talking about it, between now and the September meeting, we get
That's
2
already
more
sold out.
job reports, 2 more CPI reports. I think we have an ECI report coming later this week, which is
Whoops.
Employment Compensation
Did
Index.
not sell that in time. Fuck.
And lots of data on economic activity. All of that information is going to inform our decision as we go into that meeting. I would say it is certainly possible that
This is
we
why I
would raise
can't live
funds
stream
again
and trade
at
at the same
September
time.
meeting if the data warrant it. And I would also say it's possible that we would choose to hold steady at that meeting. We're going to be making careful assessments, as I said, meeting by meeting. And I'll close by saying we've raised the federal funds rate now by 525 basis points since March 2022. Monetary policy, we believe, is restrictive and is putting downward pressure on economic activity and inflation.
All right, I probably just
If I
kind of
could just
chill.
briefly follow up on something
See
you
what the
said
market
there.
does.
You said the data in the intermediate period
P for
it
patience.
broadly came in line with expectations. Does that mean there's unlikely to have been a change in the overwhelming outlook of the committee that 2 more hikes are necessary?
I'm just going to go back to what I said. That's the question. We have 8 weeks now until the September meeting, and all that data that I recited, we're going to be looking at all of that and making that assessment then. And it really, we did have the one good reading, and of course we welcome that, but it's just one reading, as everybody knows. And we've seen this before in the data. Many forecasts call for rates for inflation to remain low, but we just don't know that until we see the data. So we'll be focusing on that.
We're coming down.
Thanks for taking our questions, Chair Powell. Obviously, you upgraded the language around growth in the statement today. We've seen the Barbie movie numbers. We've seen everyone going to Taylor Swift concerts this summer. It seems like the American consumer is in pretty good shape. And it does seem like growth is sort of picking back up a little bit, or at least doing well. And I wonder from
We
your
wanna
perspective,
go to the
if that
movies.
continues, if we see growth not just stabilizing, but doing performing well this summer. Is that a problem because it's inflationary, or is it good news because it suggests that a soft landing is more likely? Just how are you thinking about that sort of trajectory?
Yeah, so I would say it this way. The overall resilience of the economy, the fact that we've been able to achieve disinflation so far without any meaningful negative impact on the labor market, the strength of the economy, overall, that's a good thing. It's good to see that, of course. It's also, you see consumer confidence coming up and things like that. That will support activity going forward. But you're right, though. At the margin, stronger growth could lead over time to higher inflation, and that would require an appropriate response from monetary policy. So we'll be watching that carefully and seeing how it evolves over time.
We'll be watching. Is that from Monsters Inc.?
Thanks, Chair Powell. Neil Irwin from
Something.
Axios. So as you referenced earlier, in the intermeeting period, soft CPI, jobs reports, still strong but moderating, JOLTS looks good. So if you're data dependent, why not pause again? Why not stay on hold? Why not take another meeting off when the data was at least cutting in the direction you want to see?
So if you go back to what we're trying to do here, we're trying to achieve a stance of policy that's sufficiently restrictive to bring inflation down to 2%. At the last meeting, we wrote down our individual estimates of that what that would take, and the median of that was an additional 2 rate hikes. So I would say we looked at the intermeeting data, and as I mentioned, broadly consistent, not perfectly consistent, but broadly consistent with expectations, and as a result, we went ahead and took another step. And that's a labor market that continues to be strong, but gradually slowing. I mentioned that the inflation report was actually a little better than expected, but we're going to be careful about taking too much signal from a single reading. And growth came in stronger than expected. So that's how we look at it, and so we did take that step today.
Oh,
Nick
this is
Timrose
the
of the Wall Street
benefit
Journal.
of volatility. I
Chair
just
Powell,
closed
markets,
almost for free. I
Widely
closed for
believe the
free.
median FOMC participants' inflation forecast from
Did not
June
close
for the
for
fourth
free.
quarter of this year will be too high, given autos and shelter, and that by September that may warrant a downward revision in the inflation forecast of 20 to 30 basis points. Would that type of inflation progress be enough to hold rates steady from here,
This
or
little
do you
tick
need to
is
see
me
below
selling
trend growth
hedges at a loss.
and decelerating labor income growth to be convinced that you've done enough?
So it's hard to pick the pieces apart and say, how much of this and how much of that. We'll be looking at everything. And, we'll be looking to see whether the signal from June CPI is replicated or the opposite of replicated, or whether it's somewhere in the middle. We'll be looking at the growth
Cannot
data.
even
We'll be
get
looking
out of
at
this
the labor
trade.
market data very closely, of course, and making an overall judgment about that. It's the totality
go.
of the data, I think, but with a particular focus on making progress on inflation.
We have to hedge because we run so close to the
You said there were
max
benefits to
margin.
moderating
We
the
have to
pace of
hedge.
increases because it would give you more information to make decisions. Would another CPI report like the one we just had in June allow you to at least maintain that slower pace and defer until the fall any decision on whether you need that second rate hike?
So I'm just going to tell you again what we're going to do. In September, we're going to look at 2 additional job reports, 2 additional CPI reports, lots of activity data, and that's what we're going to look at, and we're going to make that decision then. And that decision could mean another hike in September, or it could mean that we decide to maintain at that level. And again, the question we're going to be asking ourselves is the overall signal one that we need to do more, that we need to tighten further?
The
If we
UVIX
get
is
that signal whenever we get
tanking.
it, then and that's
I
the
might buy some
collective
calls on
judgment of the committee,
UVIX
then
just
we'll
because,
roll with it.
like,
if we don't,
It seems like they're free.
Then we'll have the option of maintaining
2025 calls on UVIX right
It's-
now
it's
at
really
2x
dependent
leverage,
so much on the data, and we just don't have it.
$2 for years of protection.
Hi, Chris Rugaber at Associated Press. So consumer confidence in the economy is rising, likely in large part because of
I'm not
of
gonna
the
buy it,
declines in
'cause I'm a
headline
wuss.
inflation. You also see wages are also rising faster than prices now after trailing them for a long time. How much are Americans truly harmed by inflation at its current level, headline level of 3%? And with that in mind, when do you put some weight back on the employment side of the dual mandate?
So I guess I'd say it this way. First, it is a good thing that headline inflation has come down so much, because that's really what the public experiences. And I would say that having headline
Why do I
inflation
wanna
move
put
down
Coinbase
that much
so
almost
hard?
creates a
I love
it will
Coinbase, but I wanna
strengthen
put
the
'em.
broad sense that the public has that inflation is coming down, which will in turn, we hope, help inflation continue to move down. So you were really sorry. What your question was?
Well, I mean, you've talked for many press conferences now about the harm created by inflation, how hard it
Yeah.
is for people. So how much of that are we still seeing with inflation now down at 3?
So I guess I would put it this way. I'd say it this way. It's really a question of how do you balance the 2 risks, the risk of doing too much or doing too little. And, I would say that, we're coming to a place where there really are risks on both sides. It's hard to say exactly whether they're in balance or not. But as our stances become more restrictive and inflation moderates, we do increasingly face that risk. But we need to see that inflation is durably down that far. As you know, we think, and most economists think, that core inflation is actually a better signal of where headline inflation is going, because headline inflation is affected greatly by volatile energy and food prices. So we would want core inflation to be coming down, because that's what we think core is signaling where headline is going to go in the future. And core inflation is still pretty elevated. There's reason to think it can come down now, but it's still quite elevated. And so we think we need to stay on task, and we think we're going to need to certainly hold policy at a restricted levels for some time, and we need to be prepared to raise further if we think that's appropriate.
Well, and then if inflation were
Oh, no.
just a quick follow,
Look at that. It's
if it
coming
stays at
down.
3
This is
or
a live
drops
view,
even
so
a
it's
little
not
bit more,
that crazy.
I mean, how much of an increase in unemployment do you think is acceptable to get that last bit of inflation? People are talking about the potential difficulty of the so-called last mile of inflation. So, but how much unemployment do you think is justified to get down that last?
So it is a very positive thing that actually the unemployment rate is the same as it was when we lifted off in March of 22 at 3.6%. So that's a real blessing, and that we've been able to achieve some disinflation. And we don't seek to, it's not that we're aiming to raise unemployment, but I would just say the historical record, we have to be honest about the historical record, which does suggest that when central banks go in and slow the economy to bring down inflation, the result tends to be some softening in labor market conditions. And so that is still the likely outcome here. And we hope that that's as little as possible. We have to be honest that is the likely outcome. The worst outcome for everyone, of course, would be not to deal with inflation now, not get it done. Whatever the short-term social costs of getting inflation under control, the longer-term social costs of failing to do so are greater, and that the historical record is very, very clear on that. If you go through a period where inflation expectations are not anchored, inflation is volatile, it interferes with people's lives and with economic activity, and that's the thing we really need to avoid and will avoid.
At this point, you say
he's so regal. He's such a regal man. That's such a
all year long we have seen
Anyway.
growth surprise to the upside, unemployment to the downside, and inflation lately to the downside. So I'm wondering, by definition, should you be restrictive enough right now under these conditions? Do you think you might need to do more? Because I'm curious about what you see as inflation dynamics now. Is the economy still moving in a direction where it creates more inflation? People talk about base effects and higher energy costs, and now we have some large labor settlements. Or is the economy disinflating, and you're able to go back to the old Fed policy of opportunistic disinflation?
So I'll just say, again, the broader picture of what we want to see is we want to see easing of supply constraints and normalization of pandemic-related distortions to demand and supply. We want to see economic growth running at moderate or modest levels to help ease inflationary pressures. We want to see continued restoration of supply and demand balance, particularly in the labor market, and all of that should lead to declining inflationary pressures. Now, what we see is those pieces of the puzzle coming together, and we're seeing evidence of those things now. But I would say that what our eyes are telling us is that policy has not been restrictive enough for long enough to have its full desired effects. So we intend, to keep policy restrictive until we're confident that inflation is coming down sustainably toward our 2% target, and we're prepared to further tighten if that
we
is
need to rescue.
And we think the process, still probably has a long way to go.
Well, do you think under current conditions you are restrictive enough unless something changes?
Well, I think we think today's rate hike was appropriate, and I think we're going to be looking at the incoming data to inform our decision at the next meeting about is the incoming data telling us that we need to do more, and if it does tell us that collectively, if that's our view, then we will do more.
See if we can also get some order flow on the screen.
Colby Smith with the Financial Times. If September is in fact a live meeting, how does that square with the need for a more gradual tightening pace that you spoke of last month and explaining the rationale for holding
Actually,
the
let's keep
funds
this
rate
chart
steady
here.
at the June meeting.
And we'll do
So
this in a separate
A more
window.
gradual pace doesn't go immediately to every other meeting. It could be 2 out of 3 meetings, right? It just means if you're slowing down. The point really was to slow down the decision cycle as we get closer and closer to, we think, our destination. And I wouldn't want to go automatically to every other meeting because I just don't think I think it's not an environment where we want to provide a lot of forward guidance. There's a lot of uncertainty out there. We just want to keep moving at what we think is the right pace. And I do think it makes all the sense in the world to slow down.
We were still bullish
as we
today.
now
So
make
crazy.
These finally,
we were bullish this
judged,
morning
decisions.
before
So
this
that's what we did.
conference
And
started.
So I think
Insane.
it's possible. I mentioned
That's a
before,
sea
it's possible
change.
that we would move it consecutive meetings.
Sorry,
We're not
Bears.
taking that off the
I'm
table,
one of 'em.
Or we might not. It's really going to
Right,
depend
I
on
got
what the data
toasted
tells
too.
us. That's the best we can do.
So we shouldn't assume that every other meeting is the lowest tightening frequency, let's say. It could be, longer intervals in between as well.
I think we're going to look. I think we're going to make a decision about the
Scoot
next meeting, and then
Mr.
we're
Powell
going to
up
make a
here.
decision about the one after that. And I think it'll sort itself out.
We'll scoot this guy over here.
Thanks. Howard Schneider with Reuters. Among your colleagues, there have been people who've said they feel
And
that
we'll put this guy
very
right
little
here.
transmission has taken place so far from monetary policy into the economy, and there are those who feel, they say, it's happened very fast this time and it's kind of up to date. Where are you on that continuum?
So there's a long-running debate about
let's
the
look at
lags
some
between
names.
changes in financial conditions and the
Coinbase,
response to those changes
bullish.
from economic activity and inflation, right?
Good.
So we know
Super
that in the
bullish.
modern era, financial conditions
Snap.
move in anticipation of our
Sorry.
decisions, and
Little
that
bit
has clearly
bearish.
been the case in this cycle. So in a
Arc,
sense, the clock
probably
starts
bullish.
earlier
Whoa,
than it used
that's
to, but that doesn't necessarily
hedging.
change the
That's
process
hedging.
from that point on, and it's not clear that it has.
Disney?
We also, I'll tell you what we
Bullshit.
know and then what we don't know. We know that financial conditions affect economic activity and inflation with a lag that can be long and variable, or lags, plural, that can be long and variable. A lot of uncertainty around the length of the lags, and by the way, that's just one component of the broader uncertainty that we face. So I'll tell you how I think about this. The
Snap's
first thing
getting
to
some
say
calls.
is we're determined to bring inflation down to 2% over time, and we will use our tools to do that. No one should doubt that. I would look at it this way, though. The real federal funds rate is now in meaningfully positive territory. If you take the nominal federal funds rate, subtract a mainstream estimate of
BA.
near-term inflation
Bank of
expectations, you get a
America?
real federal funds rate that is well above most estimates of the longer-term neutral rate. So I would say monetary
Boeing, it is
policy is
Boeing.
restrictive, more so after today's decision, meaning that it is
Boeing.
putting downward pressure on economic activity and inflation.
Take a look at
We'll
Boeing.
keep monetary policy restricted until we think it's not appropriate to do so. So that's how I think about it.
It's hard to
I
say
mean,
with these legacy
if I sum it
players.
up, I would say we've come a long way. We are resolutely committed to returning inflation to our 2% goal over time. Inflation has proved repeatedly it's
Damn.
proved stronger than we and other
Up
forecasts-
7%. This is
yeah,
why we look at the
forecasters
order
have
flow.
expected.
Look at this.
And at some point that may change. We have to be ready to follow the data, and given how far we've come,
Boeing.
we can afford to be
Getting
a little
called.
patient as well as resolute as we let this unfold.
On the credit side, I'm wondering if you saw anything in the latest SLOOS data that made you think you're getting a quantum of credit contraction beyond what you'd expect. The bank
Let's go
funding
see the
data
Boeing
really
calls.
is the growth rates edging down towards and heading below zero, which is usually a recession indicator.
So I guess the SLOOS will come out early next week, and I would just say it's broadly consistent with what you would expect. You've got lending conditions tight and getting a little tighter. You've got weak demand, and it gives a picture of pretty tight credit conditions in the economy. I think it's really hard to tease out how much of that
Can't
is
have
from
that on
this
the
source or
screen.
that
Shit.
source. But I think what matters is the overall
Hopefully that
picture
doesn't bug
is
me.
of tight and tightening lending conditions, and that's what this SLOOS will say.
Maybe I can crop that out.
Hi, Chair Powell.
Fuck,
Rachel
I
Siegel
did it
from
again.
Washington Post. Thanks for
Shit.
taking our questions. Could you break down the reasons why inflation has fallen and what share of that
Hopefully that
credit you
doesn't
would
fuck me.
give to factors that don't stem directly from rate hikes or that might be within your control at all, like easing supply chains and a drop in energy prices?
Hopefully I
over the
don't
past
live
year?
stream all the porn I watch. I don't watch porn, guys.
So
I'm not a porn guy.
interesting.
You can
question.
watch
So
porn. I have
let me
nothing
start by
against
saying
it.
that the inflation surge that we saw in the pandemic resulted from a collision of elevated demand and constrained supply, both of which followed from the unprecedented features of the pandemic and the response from fiscal and monetary policy.
All right,
And we've
here's all
always
the calls
expected
on
that
Boeing.
the disinflationary process would stem from both from the normalization of those broad pandemic-related supply and demand conditions and from restrictive monetary policy, which would help return the balance between supply and
what are
demand
we
by restraining
buying
demand.
today?
I think that's
They're
broadly
scalping.
what we're seeing. So to go break it down a little further, of course, headline inflation has come down sharply from elevated levels as energy and food prices have come down, mostly due to reversal of the effects from the war in Ukraine.
They're not even going that long.
And that's a good thing, and the public experiences that, as I mentioned earlier. For core inflation, I'd say there has been a role for both factors, both that I mentioned. Clearly, for goods, normalization of supply conditions is playing an important role, as is the beginning of the reversal of spending
Check out this
back
action on
into
Zions.
services and away from goods.
Not
And
that much.
Take autos as an example. The combination of an increase in sales and inventories, while
It's all
vehicle
scalps.
inflation has decelerated, points to a substantial role for supply. But there's also a role for demand, as the loans and things like that are more expensive. So they're both working there. Housing services inflation now starts to move down. Clearly, higher rates have slowed
They're
the
still
housing
calling
market.
Boeing. Maybe we'll follow them on this trade. What are they calling?
I would
They're
say
buying the
monetary
310
policy is working
calls
about
in
as we
January.
expect,
Let's
and
see
we
what their
think- We
costs.
think it'll play an important role going forward, in particular in non-housing services, where really we think
Well, I
that's,
guess it
that's
should be
where the
right there,
labor
right?
market,
$1.50.
will come in as a very, very important factor. So we think both of those
$1.50 to follow these hedges
sources
into
of
this trade
disinflation are playing
on a
important
name I
roles.
love.
And just to follow up, do you think that of those two sources, that core will
All
rely
right,
more heavily
let's just
on
do it.
seeing an impact
We'll
from
follow
rate
'em.
hikes, or is there a more even split there?
Just for
I think
fun, because we're
monetary
doing it
policy is going to
live.
be important going forward, because we're sort of reaping
We'll buy the
now
top of
benefits
Boeing.
of the,
They're still calling.
of the reversal of some of the very specific pandemic things. We're seeing that with goods in particular. With
Order
supply
didn't
chains and
execute. I'm a wuss.
shortages
I'm not doing it.
improving. And we're seeing, so I think going forward, monetary policy will be important, particularly in the
Let's
sector,
see what else is
in
happening.
the non-housing services sector.
What's MDT again?
Thank you, Chair Powell. First, let me compliment your tie, the choice of tie. So thanks for taking our question. So the Beige Book, it said, input cost pressures remain elevated for services firms, but ease notably for manufacturing sector. Is that an indication that there's a wage inflation pressure? And how do you target and pressure on the wage inflation without pushing the economy into recession?
I think as it relates to goods, it's really an indication that supply chains and shortages are easing. And so what was the first part of it?
So wage inflation, like how do you target wage inflation without pushing an economy into a recession?
I don't think we're targeting wage inflation. I think what we're looking for is a broad cooling in labor market conditions, and that's what we're seeing. So wages have actually been gradually moving down. They're still at levels that would be consistent
That
over
can't
a
be
long
true.
period of time with 2% inflation. Nonetheless, we're making progress there, and by so many indicators, labor market demand is cooling. You can look at surveys by workers and businesses who see that. You can look at the quits rate normalizing. You can look at job openings coming down. You can look at just job creation in the establishment survey has, it's still at a high level, but it was at really an extraordinarily high level for most of the last 2 years. So you see cooling, particularly in private sector in the last in the last report. So I think we see that, and it's happening at a gradual pace. So that's actually not a bad thing in a sense, because if what we see is
See
a
the
labor
snap
market,
calls.
very strong demand for labor, which is really the engine of the economy. People are getting hired, many people going back to work, getting wages, spending money, and that's really what's driving the economy. But that it's gradually slowing, it's gradually cooling. That's a good prescription for getting where we want to get.
But still, we see a push to raise minimum wage. We're seeing a lot of unions go on strike or threaten strike. And the common thing is they come out with agreements like big pay increases, like UPS, and we have the auto workers coming up. Are you concerned then about a trend of series of big unions,
Populate.
these contract pushing wage inflation then?
Magic.
Not for us to comment on contract negotiations. Not our job, not our role. We monitor these things, and we'll keep an eye on them. But really, that's something that's handled at that level. And not,
Oh, how far we've fallen. Lots of scalping.
Hi, Victoria Guido with Politico.
Let's see who's going
I
on.
wanted to ask about the SCP,
So my-
which suggests
okay.
that you would cut rates as overall and core PCE
Oh,
get
Boeing
to
probably doesn't
around
have-
or under 3%. And so I'm wondering, is the level of inflation what's sort of important there as you think about getting to 2% and when you might start cutting rates? Or is the speed at which inflation is falling also important?
I think you'd take both into account. I think you'd take everything into account when you start cutting rates. It would depend on the whole, on a wide range of things. And when people are writing down rate cuts next year, you know, it just is a sense that inflation is coming down and we're comfortable that it's coming down and it's time to start cutting rates. I think.
So here's the strikes people are looking
there's
at.
a lot of uncertainty between what happens, you know, in the next meeting cycle, let alone the next year, let alone the year after that. So it's hard to say exactly what.
$15,
happens,
$17.
What's motivating people?
So if it's sort of stubbornly in maybe the high twos, you wouldn't necessarily cut rates.
I'm not saying that at all. I'm not giving
It's
you
just
any
come down to
numerical
here.
guidance around that. I'm saying we'd be comfortable
Consensus
cutting
is
rates when we're
$20,
comfortable cutting rates. And
but
that won't be
consensus
this
by
year, I don't
January
think.
2021.
It would be, but, you know, many people wrote down
is
rate cuts for next
forming-
year. I think the median was several
Well, why don't we
for
just do
next
this?
year. And that's just going to be a judgment that we have to make then, a full year from now. And it'll be about how confident we are that inflation is, in fact, coming down to our 2%.
This is probably
goal.
the most popular chain anyway.
A
Consensus
good part of Wall
is
Street has become more
38,
confident
but that's not
that
volume weighted.
The
Let's
Fed
just
is going
say
to be able
this.
to engineer a soft landing, and they've reduced their forecast for recession. And I'm wondering if the staff has changed
Yeah, like
its
20.
view on the
Makes sense.
likelihood of recession being likely, and if you personally have changed your view in terms of becoming more confident that you can achieve a soft landing.
So it has been my view consistently that we do have a shot, and my base case is
The soft
we will be able
landing,
to achieve,
the softest of landings.
inflation moving back down to our target.
What an incredible
without the kind of really
legacy of
significant
history.
downturn that results in high levels of
I
job
think he
loss
did
that
it.
we've seen in
It
some
seems like he
past,
did it. We'll find out,
in
right?
some past instances, many past instances of tightening that look like ours. That's been my view. That's still my view. And I think, you know, that's sort of consistent with what I see today. So, but it's a long way from assured, and you know, we have a lot left to go to see that happen. So the staff now has a noticeable slowdown in growth starting later this year in the forecast. But given the resilience of the economy recently, they are no longer forecasting a recession. I just want to note that that our staff produces its own forecast, which is
What else can we
independent
add to
of the
this screen?
forecast that we, as FOMC
I know
participants,
what we
produce.
should add.
Having an independent staff forecast, as well as the individual participant forecast, is really a strength of our process. There's just a lot of, I think, constructive diversity of opinion that helps us make, informs our deliberations, helps us make, I hope, better decisions.
And is the reason for optimism that inflation has come down and you still have a strong labor market?
The reason
I mean,
for
does that
optimism is because
add to
we
the
live in the
optimism?
best age of history with
I
endless
wouldn't use the term
possibility
optimism
and
about
technology,
this
high
yet. I
technology,
would say, though, that there's a pathway.
and
And yes,
opportunity,
that's
and
a good way to
automation,
think
and
about it.
artificial
We've
intelligence,
seen
and
so
robotics,
far
and genomics.
the beginnings of disinflation without any real costs in the labor market, and that's a really good thing. I would just also say the historical record suggests that there's very likely to be some softening in labor market
I want
conditions,
this to be
and
above.
consistent with having a soft landing. You would have some softening in labor market conditions, and that's
There we
still
go.
likely as we go forward with this process. But it's a good
ridiculous.
thing to date that we haven't really seen that. We've seen softening through not through unemployment, not through higher unemployment. We've seen softening through
Get here.
job openings coming down part of the way back to more normal levels. The quits rate, so people are not quitting as much. We've seen participation, people coming in, and so labor supply has improved, which has lowered the temperature in the labor market, which was quite overheated, going back a year or so. So we're seeing that kind of cooling, and that's very healthy, and we hope it continues.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jeff Cox from CNBC.com. You and other Fed officials in the past have suggested that you don't need to keep hiking until inflation hits 2%, that as long as you see continued progress. So I'm
Don
wondering,
Papa.
how close do you need to get with the inflation numbers coming down? How many months of
You
data
get all the toms.
do you need to see that will give you sufficient confidence? And how far does this fight need to go before you're willing to kind of declare victory on it?
So
Until we hit
the idea
2%,
that we would
right?
keep hiking until inflation gets to 2%, it would be a prescription of going way past the target. That's clearly not the appropriate way to think about it. So, in effect, if you look at our forecasts, the median participant, and again, these are forecasting out years, so take them with a grain of salt. But people are cutting rates next year because the federal funds rate is at a restrictive level now. So if we see inflation coming down credibly, sustainably, then we don't need to be at a restrictive level anymore. We can move back to a neutral level, and then below a neutral level at a certain point.
All right,
I think
we got
would,
all
we of course would be
three
very careful
toms
about
now.
that. We'd really want to be sure that inflation is coming down.
we got
in a
3 toms,
sustainable
not all 3.
And it's hard to make. I'm not going to try to make a numerical assessment of when and where that would be, but that's the way I would think about it. Is you'd stop raising long before you got to 2% inflation, and you'd start cutting before you got to 2% inflation too, because we don't see ourselves getting to 2% inflation until all the way back to 2 until 2025 or so. So
Welcome to the. Oh no! What are we doing down? We're down. Oh, what's tanking?
Thank you, Chair Powell. Jennifer Schonberger with Yahoo
Wow,
Finance.
Apple
It's
just
been
took a
over
hit.
4 months since a handful of
Somebody's
regional
doing
banks,
just
including
broad
Silicon
selling.
Valley Bank, failed.
Yeah, this is broad
When
selling.
you look at credit conditions now, given Bank of California's acquisition of PacWest, does this
Somebody's
acquisition
pulling out.
suggest the full impact has not been felt?
Damn.
Or are you comfortable saying that we've seen most of the ripple effects that may have occurred at this point? And how does this play into your outlook for policy?
So I don't want to comment on any particular merger proposal, but I will say things have settled down for sure out there. Deposit flows have stabilized. Capital and liquidity remain strong. Aggregate bank lending was stable quarter over quarter and is up significantly year over year. Banking sector profits generally are coming in strong this quarter, and overall the banking system remains strong and resilient. Of course, we're still watching the situation carefully and monitoring conditions in the banking sector. In terms of the actual effect on, if you think of a particular set of banks that were affected because of their size and business model and things like that were more affected by the turmoil in March than others, it's very hard, as I mentioned, it's very hard to sort of tease out the effects on this very large economy of ours.
That's crazy.
From them
There's
tightening.
tons
They may
of
be
selling.
tightening a little bit more, probably
VIX
are
just spiked
than other
hard.
banks. The sleuth
Somebody
has
is
been telling
putting
us for
in
more than a year
some
that banking
freaking
conditions
puts.
are tightening. That process is ongoing, and that will restrain economic growth. So I think we have to take a step back from. I can't separate those anymore. I think basically we're just looking
Look at these
the
puts
overall
coming
picture,
in.
which is one of
Holy shit.
tightening credit conditions, and that's going to restrain economic activity. It is restraining economic activity. So that's how I would look at it.
And how is that informing your outlook for setting policy?
So I think that is an expected result of tightening interest rate policy. Is that bank
of
credit
these companies
conditions,
are, like,
bank lending
unfazed.
conditions would tighten as well. And so the question is it more effective this time because of what happened in May? I just don't think we know that. I think we're looking at the current data in GDP, and we're seeing strong spending. We're seeing a strong economy, and it's made us confident that we can go ahead and raise interest rates now for the third time
I
since
think
the
this is
March
a
events.
false move. I think this is some market move.
It seems like
I'm going to
the
roll my
economy
calls.
is weathering this well, but of course we're watching it carefully and expect to continue to do that.
Hi, Chair Powell. Thanks for taking our questions. Megan Casella with Barron's. I wondered on wages if you were at all concerned about any inflationary impact of wages now outpacing inflation, which is likely contributing to the boost in consumer sentiment and the continued strength of the consumer that we've been seeing.
Well, wages in excess of inflation means real wages are positive. Again, that's a great thing. course, we want that. We want people to have real wages, but we want wages to be going up at a level that's consistent with 2% inflation over time. As I mentioned,
I always
nominal
wonder
wages
what
have
causes
been
this.
coming down gradually, and that's what we want to see. We expect to see more of that. That's just more of what's consistent over a longer period of time. We don't really think that wages were an important cause of inflation in the first year or so of the outbreak, but I would say that wages are probably an important issue going forward. Labor market conditions broadly are going to be an important part of getting inflation back down, and that's why we think we need some further softening in labor market conditions.
This goes sort of to the balance of risks question, but you mentioned at the start how you're keeping an eye on consumer activity and whether there might be some sort of a rebound there. And I'm curious what the Fed's explanation would be to families if further interest rate hikes start to hit the labor market, start to drive that sentiment back down. What's the message there of why you continue to keep rates elevated or to raise them?
Well, we have a job assigned to us by Congress to get inflation.
This
under
is
control.
incredible
And
selling
we
happening
think
right
that
now.
The single most important thing we can do to benefit those very
QQQ
families,
is getting
especially families at the lower
slammed.
end of the income spectrum, is to
Slammed.
get inflation sustainably under control and restore
Oh, shit.
price stability.
What time is it?
We think that is the most important thing we can do now, and we're determined to do that. And I would just point out that the people who are the most hurt by inflation right away are people who are on a low fixed income, who, when you're talking about travel or transportation costs, heating costs, clothing, food, things like that, those, if you're just making it through each month on your paycheck and prices go up,
Hey,
you're in trouble right away.
now I feel
Even
called
middle-class
out.
people have some resources and can absorb inflation. People in the lower end of the income spectrum have a harder time doing that. So we need to get this done, and the record is clear that if we take too long or if we don't succeed, that the pain will only be greater. So that's how I would explain what we're doing.
Thank you, Chair
Oh,
Powell.
my
Simon
calls never
Rabinovich
hit.
with The Economist. You had said last month that this meeting this week was
Sad.
going to be a live one. In the event the market had assigned a roughly 99% probability to the rate move that you announced today, the decision was, of course, unanimous, and the statement was basically unchanged from last month. So may I ask, to what extent was the meeting actually a live one? Was there ever any doubt over the past 2 days about what the decision was actually?
Bro, that's not how espionage works.
I mean, you could.
Like he would even tell you.
Was there doubt? I would say there's a range of views on the committee, and when you see the minutes in 3 weeks, you'll see that. There's a range of views about what we should do at this meeting and what we should do at the next meeting, and it's a process that we go through. Many times when we go into a
He's an
meeting,
honest guy to
the
begin
decision
with,
is
seems
not,
like.
Fundamentally in doubt. Nonetheless, we have the meeting, and some meetings are less uncertain than others, and I'll just leave it at that.
Tesla's been going for a ride today.
Evan Reiser, Market News
Higher
International.
highs,
Thank you,
though.
Chair Powell.
That's for sure.
Financial conditions have been loosening at a fairly steady clip in recent weeks. The dollar, the stock market, etc. What does that mean for the Fed and being sure that inflation will come down to target?
So we monitor, of course, financial conditions, broad financial conditions. You're right; it's the dollar and equities, and we're of course very focused on rates and our own policy. We're going to use our policy tools to working through financial conditions to get inflation under control. The implication is, we will do what it takes to get inflation down, and in principle, that could mean that if financial conditions get looser, we have to do more.
They are going after
But
the
what
400
tends to happen,
calls.
though,
That's
is
my
financial
favorite call.
conditions
Maybe I'll
get in and out
join
of alignment
and
with
get
what
some
we're
of
doing,
that.
and ultimately,
I
over
do like
time,
that call a lot.
we get where we need to go.
If I could also ask about the SEP
I already have
that
it.
showed rate cuts. Do you expect the Fed to cut nominal rates next year while also continuing QT?
So that could happen. The question is, is that consistent with? So if you think about both of them as normalization, imagine it's a world where things are okay, and it's time to bring rates down from what are restrictive levels to more normal levels. Normalization in the case of the balance sheet would be to reduce QT. So to continue it. You depending on where you are in the cycle. So there are two
That's
independent
quantitative
things, and,
tightening.
really, the active tool.
Basically,
of monetary
are
policy
we
is rates,
injecting money
but
or
you can imagine
vacuuming it out,
circumstances
like
in which it would
subtracting
be
it, adding or
appropriate
subtracting money
to
from
have
the
them
system?
work
Is
in
my
what
understanding.
might be seen to be just different ways, but that wouldn't be the case.
Thanks, Chair Powell. Kyle Campbell with American Banker. I have a question about the discount window. I'm wondering if since the bank failures of the spring, if you've seen signs that banks have taken more steps to be proactive in assuring that they're ready to use that facility if they need to. And if you have any sort of thoughts on whether policies might be appropriate for making sure that banks sort of test regularly to show that they are prepared to use it. Thanks.
So that's a very important thing, yes, and yes to both sides of that. Yes, banks are now working to see that they are ready to use the discount window, and we are strongly encouraging them to do that, banks broadly. We did find, as you know, during the events of March, and that that it's a little clunkier. It can be a little clunkier and not as quick as it needs to be sometimes. So why not be in a situation where you're just much more ready in case you need to access the discount window?
That just sounds like prudence.
Mr. Chairman, Mark Hamrick with Bankrate. You've talked in the past about getting the housing market back into better balance, excuse me, and also that the market might have bottomed. Where do you see that situation and balance, or lack thereof, right now, particularly with the constrained inventory of existing homes that might otherwise be coming onto market at a time when existing homeowners are reluctant to move? And of course, all of that happening with
I don't know if the market's
30-year
bottom, but I
fixed rate
think
mortgage
Disney's
still
getting
around
close.
7%
I think
on
it's
the
within
heels
20%
of
at the
Fed
bottom.
tightening, and with what you're talking about, tightening industry lending standards. Are we getting
Which
closer
is
to
all
balance
the
or
variance
farther
I
away?
need.
What's your sense?
I think we've got a ways to go to get back to balance, really for the reasons that you talked about. With existing homes, there are
Damn,
many people who have
QQQ's
low
getting
rate
hit.
mortgages, and
SPY is
whereas
getting
they might
hit.
want to sell in a normal situation, they're not going to because they have so much value in their mortgage, which means that supply of existing homes is really, really tight, which is keeping prices up. On the other hand, there's a lot of supply coming
slamming the
now,
markets.
and there are people coming in. A lot of the buyers are first-time buyers coming in at buying it, with these relatively elevated mortgage rates. But I think this will take some time to work through. Hopefully, more supply comes online, and we work through it. We're still living through the aftermath of the pandemic.
We'll go to Nancy for the last question. Hi, Chair Powell. Nancy Marshall-Genzer with Marketplace. Russia has pulled out of an agreement allowing shipments of grain, safe passage through the Black Sea, and alternative routes at this point could be closed off. Just wondering, how could that contribute to higher food prices and inflation generally, and how closely are you watching that?
We are watching it, of course, very closely. And you're right, the withdrawal from the Black Sea Grain Initiative does raise concerns about global food security, particularly for poorer countries that import a large share of their food. Grain prices did go up on this news, but they remain well below their peaks of last spring. And the moves that we've seen
the grain
so far,
prices?
I would say, are not expected
Why do
to
you
make
know that?
a significant contribution to U.S. inflation. Of course, we will be watching that situation carefully.
So you don't think it would have a big effect on Fed policy at this point?
I mean,
you
I
wouldn't
don't
say
even
so.
have money to buy right now, but I do think if you bought QQQ
Thanks
at
very
this
much.
exact second, it might be a good time. Like, there's some kind of dislocation happening. This is not normal. What's going on? What? Are we over? Oh, that's a stream from Mr. Powell? Okay. Maybe we can get some commentary. Let's see who's live. I'm live. Okay. Well, that was it. Let's get the light fixed. Is that better? So yeah, Fed days are always fun days, and they're fun because the price is going to move. Could go up, could go down, but something's going to happen. And I think the the market has been kind of like ignoring the Fed for the last couple of months because I think that they see a terminal end to this rate hike cycle. And they know that out of good conscience, the Fed can't just YOLO and be like, hey, inflation solved, like it's all good and hunky-dory. No, like it's going to be data dependent, exactly as they say. And, you know, like they can make a mistake. The soft landing that everybody talks about is like, are we going to like have a crash, or can we put pressure on the economy without actually causing a recession? So like a recession, I guess, would be like a hard landing. Who comes up with these terms? I don't know. But not that it's even that bad. It kind of makes sense. I don't know. Like if you ask me, and this has been my theory for years, and I've been wrong for years, maybe. The thing that I see that draws me to the markets and it has me making this show and makes me want to get on the internet and share my ideas with people or whatever, you know, like that's a little crazy thing to do. What makes me confident enough to even try any of this stuff? The thing that I see is a massive tailwind from the growth of technology. So like, this is something I don't think people really realize. Pants is technology. Like we had to make pants, language, fire. That's all technology. You know, humans, if you drop a baby in the woods, it's an animal. It's not going to be able to speak. It's not going to know anything about the latest Taylor Swift songs or whatever concert. Like it's not going to know shit about culture. It will be a savage fucking beast. The only thing that separates us from the animals is high society. It's language, it's technology. And so one day, you know, like you got a monkey and he looked at this lump of gray matter and he said rock. And there's something about that word that just resonates and it gets the other monkey nearby excited. And then he says rock. And now we're all just saying rock, rock, rock. And because it feels good to say it and it sounds right. And so boom, like you get language, and then boom, you get agriculture and cities. And then one day, you know, like people start scribbling on the walls and we have writing and then we have mass media. All this shit is technology and we are the beneficiaries of that technology. So then things start getting pretty crazy around the time. So like solving food was a big deal, I think. But the Industrial Revolution, the Renaissance and the Industrial Revolutions were pretty big high technology moves. And I basically think, and this is my own idea, but I have heard other people, for example, Kathy Wood, is also a proponent of basically the exact same idea, I believe, developed independently, that we are in a new age of technology, a new revolution. And what is it going to be? It's going to be artificial intelligence. It's going to be robotics. We're all going to get neural links in our brain, and that's going to make us more productive. Like the whole point of AI is to level the playing field, right? It's hard to compete with Google and Microsoft, Facebook and Amazon. Those incumbents have, you know, like they have incredible resources at their disposal. And if we don't all have that same resources, how do we compete? Well, now the most valuable thing that our species has, intelligence, the thing that separates us from the animals, the abstracted neocortex, has been digitized. And we have these statistical models that are ridiculously good at predicting the next word. And it turns out that that's probably not very far from what we do. And so maybe we shouldn't be so careful or so callous, not like... Maybe we should consider consciousness as something way beyond ourselves and something we don't really understand. I agree, they're just statistical models, but maybe we're just statistical models. So anyway, back to the point of the rant, we have all of this high technology that is giving this incredible tailwind to the species. and everything is getting cheaper, better, faster. So like the cost of bread has been declining for like 1,000 years. It's so much easier to get bread today. How are you going to get bread 1,000 years ago? What are you going to go like find a seed and poke it in the ground and like water it and cultivate it and then like mill it? And like, no, you just go to the store, you buy the flour, or better yet, you buy the fucking bread, right? That's technology. So what's the new tech we got coming down the pipeline? The number one is, I don't know. It's either AI or automation. I actually think it's going to be robotics, but what is it? It's the same thing in some degree. I guess one is like a computer science, one is like a material science, but either way, they both lead to this infinite economy. Hey, look, see this V right here. That would have been a great time to buy. I had no cash to buy, but that was a dislocation because we're headed back up. And so what makes this dork feel confident to go onto the internet and spout his crazy ideas? Well, you know, I have been right about a few things in this world. And there's a reason I can even have the privilege to do this with my days. And it's because some of the things that I saw coming were true a decade ago. So now when I am here and I'm looking at the next decade, what do I think is true? Well, yeah, I just think technology continues to grow and expand at a rate that we can't understand. It will be terrifying. If you're not genuinely a little bit nervous and afraid about what the future is coming, I don't think you understand it. It's fucking terrifying. Like it's a strange new world. I was going to say brave new world. It's a strange new world. And we're going to have to find our place in it. And there's going to be big competition, and that competition will come from not just people. And so that's what I see anyway. And so how I'm positioning myself is like, I love Boeing as much as the next guy, but are people really going to be lining up to get frisked by the TSA and get on the bus and get stuck in a seat for 6 hours? Or are you going to take your puppy in a quadricopter or whatever, like an air taxi that is like relatively silent and is completely private, and you can bring your dog and cost half as much? Yeah, you're definitely going to take the air taxi. And so are air taxis going to be real? Well, they're going to be real for the rich, that's for sure. You know, like the rich are already building hopping with helicopters. This just makes it more accessible to everyone. And so that's just one example, though. Anyway, I don't need to like go on a rant and name every technology that I think is going to explode. I think the main key is to think of technology as pants. That's a good example. Like, I don't think people think about clothing as tech. It's high tech. It was high technology at its time. That's for fucking sure. And so, like, I don't get this Nike hat for free, right? Like, the species had to grind. People had to die horrible deaths throughout all of time and history to build up the manufacturing power to get this hat made for, I don't know, $1.50 and sell it to me for $20. And that's why Nike's at 108 or whatever their stock price is, 109. And so, yeah, like we have this incredible tailwind of technology that is just beginning to lift off, and it's changing the world. We might as well have aliens terraforming the planet. That is how dramatic I see the 2030s from the 2020s. And if you look at the 2020s and you compare them to the 2010s, that skew is already getting pretty wide, right? Like, you remember what it was like before an iPhone? I, as a kid, had an almanac, you know, like I had a book of maps. And when we were on a road trip, I would have to find what road we were on. We're like, we're on I-15. Okay, well, like you open up to the state, and then you look for where you think you are in that state, and you just kind of search until you find a crossroad, and then boom, you locate yourself on a map. Well, it takes about 10 minutes to fucking do that versus just pulling up your phone and you got the blue dot for free. You don't even know where you are. You just follow wherever the blue line says to go. That's a cost decline of technology. What is going to happen when every single person has a Jarvis level AI in their pocket in the form of Siri? What's going to happen when you have an embedded ear plant that links you to this AI 24/7 so that it knows your dreams, it knows what you mutter in your sleep? When you wake up, it greets you in the morning, and of course it gives you all access to any information you could ever want, and it can do tasks, and it's basically anything somebody like a foreign assistant could do, like an offsite assistant. AI is going to be able to do that. What's going to happen? Well, I think it's obviously going to be a major disruptive force. I think a lot of people are I think it's going to be a bifurcating thing. So you're going to have the haves and the have-nots, or maybe like the creators and the plebs or whatever. Like there's going to be, the consumers is a better word than plebs. Like there's going to be dorks that just want to sit on their couch and eat pizza and watch TV and take advantage of all the new content that's out there. I've been that guy. That's not bad, whatever. But for anyone who's a builder, for anyone who has ideas, for anyone who sees how things could be and not necessarily are yet, it's a brave new world. It's a whole new world. It's a exciting, strange opportunity that is at once terrifying and exciting. And so how do you begin to leverage that? What makes any of this real and not just like word salad bullshit words that I'm saying? Open up GDP. Well, mine's gamma delta theta. Open up OpenAI's chatbot, ask it a question. It knows everything. You can ask it anything. So here's something, I'm a programmer, another cost decline. So one of the things that you want to do in programming is you want to have really strict rules about how your code is structured. They call it typing, is one of the ways you do it. You want to have like really clear types. Like one type is a block, one type is a circle, one type is a triangle. And so like whatever, like there's just different types of shapes, different types of things. Doesn't matter. Point is, managing those types is a bunch of busy work. Doesn't take any logic to do it. You just have to go in and manually slog through and write that code. It's chopping wood, basically. Well, guess what? Nobody chops wood anymore. Every time I need a new type interface, I copy and paste the JSON blob into ChatGPT or whatever, and it freaking does it all for me. And then I copy and paste that into my program, and it works. And it works perfect. And I never have to sit there and research Stack Overflow for some bespoke unit of logic. I just give my broken function to the freaking computer and ask it for ideas on a better way to structure the code, or like what the bug is. And it will know the resources and libraries that I'm extending, and that it will be able to use those to like solve the problem in a way that I never even could have thought of, because I haven't read all the documentation, and it knows everything. So yeah, like economy, blah, 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 whatever, like interest rates, all that's real shit. But the realest thing that I see that I'm very excited about, and what makes me not care so much about the Brownian motion up and down on any given day, and really just trying to take as much ownership as I can of positions and take my positions in companies I care about, is what I'm trying to do. What makes me not care about any of the Brownian motion of the day is the long view. And when you look at the long view, like I said, it's exciting and terrifying. But what it definitely is one of infinite opportunity. And there's always going to be pessimists who say that the sky is falling and the end of the world is nigh and Armageddon is tomorrow. Guess what? They've been saying that for 1,000 fucking years. As far as I can tell, they've been saying it since the beginning of dawn, since the dawn of consciousness, since the beginning of time. Dorks have been saying this whole thing is about to run off and be over. It's not. You're going to die, and the whole world is going to go on like it never, ever happened. Disney's going to outlive you. Okay? Think about that. Like Boeing, probably going to outlive you. We are in the apocalypse. We are the ones who like may not last till tomorrow. The species, we're fucking rats. Like we're bacteria. We're the scum on the side of the ship. Like it's impossible to get rid of us. It's never going to happen. And we'll colonize other planets. We'll spread our spunk through the universe. But for today, like the world isn't collapsing. No. You can just go look at the Bible and see all the Bible people saying that, and then you can see it again in the 1500s and the 1750s and the year 2000 and 2023. There's going to be some fucking dork out there telling you that this whole thing is 1 second away from coming off the rails. Idiot. It's not. Like, it's not. Here's why it's not. Not because of happenstance, not because of luck, but because there's a new man born every day who's willing to grind himself to the dust for something. Well, we can talk about later what I think that is. But what's he going to do? He's going to produce things. He's going to grow crops. He's going to build widgets. And he's going to have a surplus. And then he's going to sell that surplus for a profit. And that in doing so, he achieves his goal. And guess what? There's not like one of those guys. There's not like 10 of those guys. There's like 5 million of those guys. Maybe there's 500 million of those guys out there out of 8 billion, whatever we're at these days. And so like these guys are what our species is built on. Men and women, I guess these days, I don't know, who are hyper motivated to create and build and expand, and if only to just spread their seed as far and wide as they can. Doesn't even matter what their motivation is, they're still going to do the work. And we are the beneficiary of thousands of years of accumulation is the key. It's accretive. It's accumulative. It's accumulative. Okay? This is something that I love about coding. I write a unit of code that automates something for me that works in perpetuity. Like, let's say you build a widget that makes a penny. Well, now it just makes pennies all day long, forever. And with very little maintenance, actually, especially if built well. And so that's kind of everything I am seeing. I don't know if, like how much you guys care about like these kind of like extracurricular rants, but the reason why I'm pretty confident about the future of the economy I wouldn't even say the economy, I'll just say of markets and just like optimism for the future. It has nothing to do with any action I'm going to take or anyone else or even the macro. And it has everything to do with the momentum established by the species. And so maybe if I had a takeaway that I thought people should think about is to just consider, what is technology? What is technology? Is it an iPhone or is it pants? Like, it's pants and an iPhone, but like first we had to make pants. And I don't think people consider that. I think they turn on their tap and they just take clean water for granted. Like you can't take that for granted. People died for that water to be clean. They died for that water to be free and accessible on a tap. Okay? Like, that's what we already paid to accumulate all of this advantage, which we can now apply to the future. And so we are, I believe, entering a strange new world of AI, robotics, and automation and high technology. And I believe it's going to change everything. And so the companies that I'm kind of like trying to position myself for to take advantage of that change that I think are the most interesting is I love the crypto economy. So obviously the leader there will be Coinbase. I love democratizing finance in general. So the leader there is going to be Robinhood. Sorry, SoFi, not going to happen. How can you beat Robinhood? You're never going to beat Robinhood. Like, you should just buy. Anyway, whatever. It's got some like applications that Hood can't do, but as far as like the thing that is going to catch fire is Robinhood. What else? Obviously Tesla can't even, doesn't even have to be talked about. I think the ARC funds do a great job of capturing all this, really. Like, I'm not super into the genomics part, mostly because I don't understand it, but they see it. They see what I'm talking about. And so, yeah, like, if you want one ETF to try to like buy the future I see, that might be a good one. Meanwhile, we got Tesla calls coming in and we're getting more bullish. And so it's time for me to wrap up and attend to my portfolio. I have somebody coming over soon. Anyway, great live stream. Great hanging out with you guys. Hopefully you like that rant. We got the Toms here supporting us. Thank you all the Toms. And thank you to Mr. Jerome Powell for leading us through this time of chaos. And hopefully, like, it's hopefully we can accomplish actually everything that he says that he wants, which is a soft landing and inflation to come down. Hopefully we can do that. So until the next live stream, which maybe is like Saturday or Sunday, something like that, what do I have? Like, peace be unto you, and go and walk with God or the devil, whichever one you fancy. All right. See you guys. Bye.